on today's episode.
Yeah. Well, and it's interesting. I've always been fascinated by, there's kind of this ingrained desire to appease a superior being. And one thing that makes Christianity the most unique out of all religions is there's just that flat-out conclusion, there's no way you're going to do it. You can't do it. You cannot offer enough child sacrifices. You cannot offer enough adult sacrifices. You cannot offer enough food offerings. You can't, no matter what you do, it's never going to be enough. So God said, I'll do it. And he did it with his son.
Welcome to the Life Challenges podcast from Christian Life Resources. People today face many opportunities and struggles when it comes to issues of life and death, marriage and family, health and science. We're here to bring a fresh biblical perspective to these issues and more. Join us now for Life Challenges.
Hi, and welcome back. I'm Krista Potratz, and I'm here today with Pastors Bob Fleischman and Jeff Samuelson. And we welcome all of our listeners to the month of May. And today we are going to be starting off with our current event episode for the month here. So we have a few different things we want to talk about. And the first that we'll start with is the tiniest pacemaker. Bob, can you tell us a little bit about this tiny pacemaker that was developed?
Well, what they did is there's a problem, and it's a small number, between 50 and 100 children a year around the world have to go on to a pacemaker for about 7 days. The problem is it was always very dangerous because the wires and all that stuff. So they developed a pacemaker about the size of a grain of rice, and they're able to implant that, and then they would activate it by shining light over the chest area. When I first saw the story, I think this was developed out of Northwestern University. It was a flashback for me from about maybe 25, 30 years ago. They were going to develop all sorts of different treatments in which they would implant nanobots or things like that into the body and then activate and deactivate them by flashing light that would be flashed through the body. One of the questions that kind of came to my mind when I dug deep on this article was, first of all, how many children are really going to be affected by this? And it did say that really only worldwide about 50 to 100 a year. And of course, you're going, well, there are millions of children that require different surgical things. Only 50 to 100 was this the best place to put the resources? Well, unless one of those 50 to 100 children is your child. Like so many other things, the technology that was used to do this, and it's able to keep going. There's a process they use to keep it going because you don't have a big battery hooked up to it or anything. And but a lot of the science behind it, I think, will be valuable in other areas of medicine. So I found it to be a remarkably fascinating story of just how they can do some of this.
Yeah, and one of the fascinating things about this one in particular is that when it's no longer needed, it just dissolves away.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah, and that was the thing, too, was that these little tiny babies don't have to have another surgery to remove it.
Well, and that was kind of the big push behind the whole story was that it removed so many of the hazardous intersections in care for somebody that size that's already got some challenges. They're almost all preemies. And then, but the challenges are, you've got a heart defect, you need this pacemaker, and the pacemaker, they generally figure it has to last for about 7 days. And that's pretty much how this works. And after that, it goes away. I would guess, and I didn't get into the whole makeup, but, it might be like dissolvable sutures or something like that. That I think it's going to be interesting to watch a story like this 10 years from now and try to imagine where we might be on something like this.
Yeah. It might be worthwhile just to explain what a pacemaker is and does.
Yeah, what it does is that the body begins to, the heart might be losing rhythm, and a pacemaker kind of gives it like little electrical jolts to kind of keep it, like if it's out of rhythm, it like in microseconds kind of picks it up and gives it a zap and creates that regular rhythm that it needs. When they operate on a neonate, a child, a newborn preemie, a lot of times that the surgery, that there just needs to be some time for healing. And so then the body doesn't always keep a regular heartbeat, which is needed. And when you don't have a regular heartbeat, probably the first area of the body that's affected is going to be the brain, because you need to be able to transport oxygen, get it up to the brain. And that's the one thing you don't want to have happen at any time, but especially at this stage of life.
In the article, too, that you shared, there was a little video of it, too. And so my kids were all watching the video. And it was fun, because it is so tiny. I mean, they show it like next to a pencil and a tip of a pencil. And then you like, wow, is that it? And it seems like that's kind of the thing with technology is like, let's try to get it as small as possible. And it was really neat to see it. It was really neat for my kids to be able to see it and for us to talk about it.
Again, I just would say, watch for what the future is going to bring. I think, like I said, it was about 30 years ago that I think I read the first article about activating different remedy things for the body by flashing light. And the micro size of this only makes it even more fantastic. When I was in seventh grade, I remember my Mr. Kramer was my, I think, social studies teacher or something. And he was talking about kind of a technology race between us and Russia. And the Russians had sent a human hair with a drill through it, a drill bit through the human hair, and how small that was. And then the Americans sent that same piece back with a drill bit through the drill bit. That was 50 years ago or more when I was in those grades, and now you see this. I mean, I'm always fascinated by technology and what it can do.
Well, another topic that we wanted to talk about today was marijuana use now is shown to be harmful to male fertility. There was a study out that kind of was talking about this. And I guess one of the things, it was just very interesting to me because I guess I had never really thought about this, or just a very different topic too to talk about.
And maybe what we first of all need to clarify is that there's a form of marijuana that is used for medicinal purposes, and then there's marijuana that's used to give you a high. And what this study was pointing out was that the chemical that's used to give you a high was the chemical that's the problem in fertility. Believe it or not, a male only needs about 4% of the sperm to be active to still be considered a fertile male. But the two things that seem to create a lot of problems in fertility is smoking, just regular cigarette smoking. And then the second thing is marijuana. And the biggest effect it affects sperm in three ways, but the biggest effect is it changes the shape of the head of the sperm. And sperm head that is awkwardly formed is basically impotent. It doesn't work. And it drops fertility from like 4% to 2%. You are now classified as infertile, and the level of infertility has been rising steadily since the 70s. There's always two arguments. I've always felt that there might be a role for marijuana and for medicinal purposes, because there is some situations where pain cannot be alleviated and so forth, and they can do it without the hallucinatory effects with this. But it's the hallucinatory element that creates the problem here, and a lot of people have to do that. Now, the other thing that I found interesting is they do claim that, and this didn't come out in our story, but I found it later, that if you're getting ready to have children, you have to kind of lay off the stuff for about 6 months. And they say, well, if you lay off the stuff, then the fertility will come back. The one thing I would point out is the infertility issue is a bigger issue than we're going to cover in just this little news story. Mm-hmm. But they say that there's a lot of factors associated with infertility, and infertility is becoming a concern because as people have waited longer to have children, then all of a sudden they discover they can't have children. And this has opened up the whole arena of IVF and surrogate parenting and all of those things. And really, the simple message is, two lifestyle things you could do that would help male fertility, and that is stop smoking cigarettes and stop smoking joints.
It's interesting that, I believe we touched on it on one of the birth control episodes that, there's been this search for an effective means of male birth control. And it appears that all along, there has been one that just people were not quite aware of.
I don't think we're promoting that.
Yes. On the other hand, you could say, well, maybe it's a good thing that regular marijuana users are not becoming fathers. God kind of working that thing out in a balance there. And one of the things that really struck me about this is it's an irony, and it's not just about this, but it's connected to many other things, that at the same time that science is identifying more and more things that are harmful about recreational marijuana use, more and more places, countries and states here in the United States are legalizing it. And it's one of those things, like many of these places, we're all about the science, but not this. Because we like this, and this makes us popular with just the right people, we think, politically or whatever. And it really is cutting off your nose to spite your face. That, one of the things I don't exactly have much opportunity to point this out, but if people were to ask me, I would point it out that the marijuana that kids were smoking when I was in high school is, I don't know, it's something like just 1/10 the potency of the stuff that is, people are using today.
Yeah, because they've used science to make it more potent.
And, and it's not just that you get that much better a high out of it. And it's all these negative effects also are multiplied, because most of them are tied, as you mentioned, to the thing that is what makes you high, that effective ingredient. And it's just another one of those things that you have to say, well, if government is supposed to help protect the people, maybe we should be asking government to be doing a little bit more regulation than it has been doing.
First of all, you got to remember that there's always a lag in the way discoveries are made and a lag in the way alarms are sounded. Everyone's finally beginning to say, we're not having the population explosion that we were talking about in the 1970s. In fact, they're expecting things to start shrinking. There's been astounding, stories about what could happen to South Korea in just like 2 generations. Mm-hmm. South Korea could disappear. This is what happens when you have a dropped fertility rate. But if you're only living for the moment, then you don't care about your children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren. You're more concerned about getting your high, having your fun, doing what you want. And the problem is that you're going to create a nightmare for future generations. It's more than the coincidence that the first great command or the first great directive or the first great blessing was be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth. And when the earth starts becoming less filled, everyone's going to go, oh, well, maybe we should get going. And then all of a sudden you find we have this declining fertility rate. Well, it's because we started bad habits. And like Jeff pointed out, I think what's going to happen is you start bad habits and then people start saying, well, I don't want to give that up, and I don't want to stop doing that. And then pretty soon things just get worse and then you've gone too far.
And I think we do keep turning to technology or just different things like how can we still do what we want to do, but solve some of these other problems too. Well, another topic here, and a very interesting one, and is these longevity clinics that are coming out. And Bob, you shared this article, and I don't know if you want to kind of explain what a longevity clinic is, but it seems like they've been in other places, but now they're kind of coming to the U.S.
Well, and it's interesting. My first practical exposure to the concepts behind longevity clinics is, with Diane's condition. And for those of you who maybe aren't following, my wife has got grade 4 glioblastoma, which is terminal brain cancer. And our first big exposure to what all was involved was to have, she had to have an MRI, and that's where they identified it. And of course, everything I do a deep dive into it all to understand it. And I found that, wealthy people they wanted full body MRIs, because they feel we can identify masses, we can identify problems, early on. And so, between CT scans and MRIs and X-rays and all that kind of stuff, That search led to these other longevity clinics. And I think the article said there's something like 800 of them in the United States now. And yeah, and I mean, people are just, and of course, it's when you're living for the here and now, when you're living for this, you want to make it as good as you can. And I wrote an article, a 14-page article that's posted on the CLR website where I just talk about the difference between the measures we go through to preserve life as opposed to prolonging the dying process and where that line is. But when I was reading this article, how far do we go? And those of you who heard a corollary story, which we did not include in this, but there's like a pill now you can give your dog to live longer. And there was just an article I read last week in which they said the whole story hasn't been told on that one either. And that is the ability to live longer does not mean you're going to live longer like you are right now. I mean, it's like, for example, if I were 35 and, I could do this, I could live longer and everything. But see, your whole body changes at different rates in different places at different times and so forth. And I think people are losing sight of the fact that maybe if we start off life remembering that we have an eternal life in heaven. It was funny because I looked at the 5 main selling points of longevity clinics, and this is what they are. There is the idea of optimizing peak performance. You can, however you are, you can be better. Now you have to remember, I'm OCD. So I'm thinking, if get a little bit more out of the day, I can get by with a little bit less sleep, all that kind of stuff. It talks about optimizing. Second thing it does is it's really big to promote it. They get celebrities involved and social influencers. And all I could think of is how, I was just listening to a makeup ad the other day. Cindy Crawford, you could look like Cindy Crawford. I don't want to look like Cindy Crawford. But I mean, but you can look like Cindy Crawford. It gets rid of the wrinkles, gets rid of the lines. All of it is trying to retain the fountain of youth. And then there's the idea of luxury experience. A lot of these longevity clinics caters to people who are wealthy. And so it's a luxury. It's a spa. It's like a camp even. And then one of the big things that I found whenever I jumped on a bunch of longevity clinic websites is this anti-aging. Really, that's what it's all about. You could live longer and so forth. And I remember kind of talked about this topic a little bit on the CLR National Board. My kind of working theory is no matter how good we get at medicine and, tiny implants and all that kind of stuff, we're just never going to get past 120 years. I think we just had somebody die at 126 or 121, but I just don't think we're going to get past it. I think that there's just like a natural time clock going on that, and that it runs out.
I read about these things like this, and I'm reminded of, I don't remember all the details, but there's a story from Greek mythology about some guy who is given the opportunity to ask for anything from the gods or a particular god who's granting a wish or something like that, and he asks for eternal life. The joke was on him. He should have asked for eternal youth, and he ends up living forever, and eventually he looks like a grasshopper because he has just shrunk so much and everything. But he's still alive. And the point you were making, Bob, about we've got there's more to life than just extending it. Particularly as Christians, for everybody who asks, is this all there is? Well, the answer is no. And so we've got to live with what lies behind and beyond.
What's up, guys? Steve here with the Balance of Gray podcast. Do you ever feel like sermons skip the chapters you're living in?
What?
Like church turned into a TED Talk after a concert? Well, at the Balance of Gray, we ask real questions, wrestle with real doubts, and we leave room for some laughs along the way.
Ooh.
But make no mistake, prophecies are unfolding, and this isn't dress rehearsal. It's the final act. The gospel isn't a vibe, it's a rescue plan. And lukewarm doesn't cut it. From scientific proof to spiritual warfare, this is where faith is not blind. Search The Balance of Gray wherever you get your podcast and hit follow now. That's The Balance of Gray podcast. I'll see you soon.
Phenomenon is what it is.
Well, and having, my father passed away, actually had a massive heart attack a week ago from the day we recorded this. And we just had the memorial service this week. But we've had, plenty of opportunity in the Fleischman household to think about what life and eternal life and so forth. And the one problem we have in the United States and in the American culture is God has richly blessed us in so many incredible ways. And, and really, we begin to believe like this is as good as it gets. And the one thing that no matter how good this life gets, if you think about the description of Revelation, wipes away every tear from their eyes, no more hunger, no more thirst, anything like that. Our culture isn't even remotely close to anything like that, no matter how affluent we are in the American culture. And, every year I go for a physical. And I signed up a number of years ago. I signed up for All of Us, which is a national program where I give them permission to monitor my health for the rest of my life. If somebody knowing what it means to be fat or skinny or diabetic or cancerous or whatever, if that could help somebody else, I'm all in favor of it. So I signed up for that. So the government monitors me. I am not frightened of it. People want to make me so frightened of that. But the thing is that I'm called in this life to spend every moment glorifying God. That's my mission. My mission is not to become a great wise sage. My mission is not to become head of a company. It's to glorify God. And you spend every day working at it, failing, picking yourself up, doing it again. But we live in a culture that teaches you to start looking in other roads. And so you start looking for a bigger house, better house, more fun family. We talk about putting off children until later so I can do the things I want. We do all those kinds of things, and it's all for naught. That's what Ecclesiastes is all about. You do it all and you lose it anyways. You leave it for somebody else. And as sooner you catch on to that, actually, the much more relaxed you are about the trials and tribulations of life.
Yeah. Yeah, and we can stipulate that it is definitely not a bad thing to promote good health and, to extend life as a healthy person. I mean, these are positive developments and, we're all in favor of them. But what Bob was talking about with, these cultural aspects of, things that we just, it's like, hey, my life is so good right now, even if by what we would consider the real standards, it's not as good as it could be. But another thing that worries me about things like this is that it could give people, again, even more of this false sense of security that leads them to think, well, I don't have to worry about death, so what is there to worry about? And so they won't think about the things that really matter, about their eternal destination, their spiritual security, and all these kinds of things, which are ultimately a lot more important. And I'll just add one last thought on this, that we already have something like these clinics that can help people live forever. It's the church.
That's what I could say. All of us technically should be longevity clinicians. I mean, really, we talk about eternity.
Well, yeah, I mean, maybe in some ways, pastors, you are. But no, I think too, one thing that just struck me was I think they said anywhere upwards to $3,000 a month that you can spend on these longevity clinics. And they are not supposed to replace your, like you were saying, your physicals, your primary care too. It is just added wellness that you are getting from this. That seems kind of crazy to me that people would spend that amount of money to do that. But I think, again, it just shows where people's priorities maybe lie.
Mm-hmm.
And if they, like Bob, you were saying, if you are just living for the here and now, then yeah, why wouldn't you spend all your money to try to make the best possible investment for the here and now?
Mm-hmm.
That's the way people are. What's even sadder is sometimes it's the way I am. I mean, I get sucked into that on occasion. You're always trying to upgrade and, find yourself trying to make heaven on earth, and you realize, whoops, went too far.
Well, if you can't afford $3,000 a month, just diet and exercise. And God's
but that's
word.
so much harder.
Yeah.
Can't you give me a pill?
It'll cost you.
Yeah.
All right. So the next topic that we wanted to talk about too is something that you had found, Jeff, and it's an ancient altar found in Guatemala in the jungle that they believe maybe was used for child sacrifices.
Yeah, this is it was just something that really grabbed my attention because of some of the cultural aspects of it, and what it says about that time and what it says about our time as well. This was an altar from and I'm going to butcher the pronunciation on this, the Teotihuacan culture, which was...
I couldn't have said it better.
Which was at the heart of what became Mexico long before the Spaniards ever came. And they found this actually, what really fascinated the archaeologists, they found this in Guatemala, which was in a place was the center of Mayan culture. So it's basically showing that there's an interaction between the two cultures. But what I think matters to us most is what this altar was used for. It was used for child sacrifices. They found the remains of 3 children not older than 4 on the 3 sides of the altar, which seems to be a pretty good indication of what the altar was used for. And it's like, I hope that most of us today still have this really awful reaction to this. It's like, sacrificing children. But unfortunately, there are people who don't have that reaction. There's this kind of cultural relativism involved. And there was one quote in here in particular from an archaeologist, and this is one who was not involved with the project, but she said, the discovery confirms that there has been an interconnection between both cultures, the Teotihuacan and the Mayan, and what their relationships with their gods and celestial bodies was like. And then she said, we see how the issue of sacrifice exists in both cultures. It was a practice. It's not that they were violent. It was their way of connecting with celestial bodies. How were these children? How did they die? I would say yes, there was violence involved and a whole lot of other things that are morally reprehensible as well. But there is this cultural relativism out there that says, well, we can't impose our values on other societies. There's a whole lot more we could talk about in connection with that, but it's just a very sad thing that people who should know better should understand that, no, there are some things that are just wrong, and it's good that they don't happen anymore. And we should never celebrate that aspect of things. I mean, yes, it's interesting that they've discovered this. There's a lot that can be learned from discoveries like this, but it's not something to relativize away as, they were just different then. It still meant that children were being murdered as part of the worship of false gods. Of course, we should find the connection between that kind of moral insanity and the way children are treated by our society now with abortion, other things with dealing with embryos and such, and destroying them and such. That the throwaway culture that we have developed here in our nation and Western civilization, this culture of death that we're developing, is really not that different. It's just that the gods are different.
Yeah. Well, and it's interesting. I've always been fascinated by, there's kind of this ingrained desire to appease a superior being. And one thing that makes Christianity the most unique out of all religions is there's just that flat out conclusion, there's no way you're going to do it. You can't do it. You cannot offer enough child sacrifices. You cannot offer enough adult sacrifices. You cannot offer enough food offerings. You can't, no matter what you do, it's never going to be enough. So God said, I'll do it. And he did it with his son. And the Bible wrestled with this. I thought it was interesting too, because this story, Jeff, that you shared, it's from a culture that they feel might be like first century in that time period, I think. Right around the turn of the century.
So somewhere between like 100 BC and 700 AD,
right?
Something.
Which is pretty incredible because in the Bible it talks about Moloch child sacrifices, and that goes back like 2,800 or 2,600 years before Christ. And then, so it just seems to have a way of coming around, but the archaeologist was correct. It represents a cultural way, but it also shows how culture can go so far off the rails that you just determine some people are expendable. I think of, the late Governor Richard Lamb, who said the elderly have a duty to die and get out of the way. I mean, Virginia Ironside in Great Britain made the comment on a Sunday morning television show that if a child is born with a disability, you should just smother it. It's just, and the thing that always shocked me is not just that she said it, but she said it on television. I mean, she said it for other people. Why? Because you realize that the culture was now becoming accepting enough that I can get away with it and wasn't going to harm my career. Cultures have a way of doing that, and people need to step back and say, with our own abortion-minded culture, what is it about our culture that has made a human being, an unborn child, expendable? What is it? It wasn't always that way. There were always people who were willing to kill unborn children throughout history, the same as there always have been people willing to kill adults and steal and all that kind of stuff. But what is it that makes it now acceptable? It's because it's a culture trying to appease the God of themselves. I need to be fully happy, and in order to be happy, sometimes people have to die. Sometimes a child has to die. And if you try to integrate it into your religion, sometimes child sacrifice. And it's so woefully wrong. But if you look at the culture, where did they go off? Where are we going off?
Yeah. I will point out there's one difference between then and now. With the idea behind child sacrifice was that, okay, the gods need to be appeased. They need to be satisfied somehow or pleased or whatever. What's the most valuable thing that I have that we can offer up as a sacrifice? Oh, my own child. I mean, that's the most valuable thing there is. But you see, very soon that goes from, well, yeah, that is a really valuable thing, but not mine. Yours instead. But at least there was still this sense of this is a really valuable thing. Our society today, that even is disappeared in so many cases. I mean, you ask parent of a 2-year-old, it's like, okay, are you willing to sacrifice your child? Get out of here! No way, because it has now become that valuable because it's something that lives and breathes and that they hugs and such. But as long as it's still in the womb, they can treat it as something that has no value.
Thank you both for this discussion today. We covered a lot of topics here, and we thank all of our listeners too for joining us. And we ask if you are interested in this podcast to please share it with other people. We hope to increase and to make more people aware of the information here too. So thank you so much for joining us, and we look forward to having you back next time. Bye.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of the Life Challenges podcast from Christian Life Resources. Please consider subscribing to this podcast, giving us a review wherever you access it, and sharing it with friends. We're sure you have questions on today's topic or other life issues. Our goal is to help you through these tough topics, and we want you to know we're here to help. You can submit your questions as well as comments or suggestions for future episodes at lifechallenges.us or email us at podcast@christianliferesources.com. In addition to the podcasts, we include other valuable information at lifechallenges.us, so be sure to check it out. For more about our parent organization, please visit christianliferesources.com. May God give you wisdom, love, strength, and peace in Christ for every life challenge.